Hi, welcome to Fearless and Flawed, and I'm Serena Reynolds, CEO and founder of Conceptive Limited.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Ferrer. I do small business consulting. And today on our podcast, we are so thrilled to be chatting with Adina O'Neill. Adina is the founder of Team Be Real, a community with a mission to build confidence, belief, and belonging through quality coaching for all endurance athletes. She offers private coaching for swimming and triathlons. And I have to tell you all, Adina is a ball of energy. She's a ball of fun. And we are just so thrilled, especially in the morning, to get our dose of Adina. So welcome, Adina, and thank you for chatting with us today.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Sarah and Zarina.
Absolutely. Now tell us a little bit so you do coaching, you're an endurance athlete. How did this all come about, this idea of sport? Take us way back to the beginning.
Way back. Well, little Adina at 5 years old was on a swim team. I grew up in a very rural area where there wasn't much to do. And we spent most of our days at the local beach, a little lake community in northern Jersey. And I loved swimming and I loved being outside. I loved it all. I've been active my entire life. Even now my mom is always watching and commenting. She's like, "Oh, just like when you were a little kid, just like when you were a little kid." I really just think it's in my nature to like to be active and explore, be adventurous, and preferably, that's not an easy word to say, outside. And so just all my life, I've been trying different things. I've done a bunch of different sports along the way, swimming, field hockey. In college, I played rugby. And after I had kids, that was when I started more doing triathlon, or after I had kids when they were a little older. It's a very typical triathlon, running, all those endurance sports, swimming, cycling, right? They're individual sports, but that you can do kind of in a group or with a group or a team. They're great for people in midlife or working moms, right? Because you're on your own schedule and you can do your own thing. So anybody from that working mom to, the later in life athlete, maybe someone who wasn't good in gym, all the way up to people through menopause and beyond. There is a space in the endurance community for all of us. And, at Team Be Real, I started this team so that way we could focus on those ordinary people becoming extraordinary athletes. I want to help regular people feel empowered, feel accepted, use that adventure, and go after achieving any fitness goal they want. Ultimately, I want them to believe they are an athlete, even though 9 times out of 10, they're like, well, I'm not an athlete. Yes, you are. Um, yeah, no, we look to, like you said, it's creating a community of belonging, building confidence, you know, cutting through all that overwhelm of how do you do that with some practical steps and, quality coaching. And so that way, you can get to whatever finish line you're dreaming of, whether it's a 5K run, a 20-mile charity bike, an Ironman triathlon, or a marathon swim, any of it. Like the finish line is whatever is in your heart that you desire to do. And that's, it's taking what's been in my heart ever since I was a little kid and bringing along as many people as I can carry.
And this is the thing behind. I know it's wow, isn't it? Behind Be Real. I love the name of this. This is like authenticity. I love that.
Yeah.
And it feels inclusive. So I really liked what you said about what like, you sort of like said they say that they're not an athlete and you say that they are. What's your definition of being an athlete?
Interesting. I actually have a signature talk that I put together since I wrote a book called Forward as a Pace. And in the signature talk, I talk about what it means to be an athlete, right? And when you look it up in the dictionary, because that's what geeks do and that's what I'm like, You look it up in the dictionary, and it says someone who basically exercises and is good at exercising. So it's kind of vague, right? Like, what does good at mean? What does exercising mean? But unfortunately, in our society, in the global society, we think of athletes as Olympians. All right. The minute you say the word athlete to someone, that's the first thing they think about. Most people, it's not a scientific fact, but most people think about Olympians because we make such a big deal about the Olympics, and it's awesome to see these amazing athletes. But these are elite athletes who have taken tons of time, tons of training, probably have some natural talent to them, and that's it's a different level, right? So an athlete, and I borrow this from Dr. Stacy Sims, who is, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of her. She is a physiologist, and her movement is basically calling out that women are not small men. And I actually took a course with her called Women Are Not Small Men. And it's all about seeing the differences between the way women and men perform. Our bodies are different. Like, they're just different. And she's a scientist, so she breaks down some of the scientists so we can use that practical information with our athletes. But one of my favorite takeaway from her was that if you exercise on purpose, you're an athlete. And I love
It
that. I've adopted that in everything I do and say and live and breathe because I believe it. Like, you don't have to win the gold at the Olympics to be an athlete. And what I try to encourage and really ingrain into the people I work with is that you are an athlete if you exercise on purpose, and every finish line or every training session, it doesn't even have to be a race or a finish line, you attack it like you won the gold at the Olympics. I mean, I'll come out of a swim with friends of mine, I'll be like, "Yes, crush it." Like I just won the gold at the Olympics because that is my Olympics. I'm not going to the Olympics. Right? And I like to watch it, and I think it's wonderful, and the stories and things that people overcome, but as an everyday regular person, we're overcoming our own things. And we may not be at that platform, but every achievement you make, whether it's like walking a 5K or running a marathon, you better cross that finish line like you just won gold at the Olympics. Because that may be that's your feeling. That's how I feel.
That is so like that resonates so everyone wants that feeling, right? What you just described, I think, is so tangible. It's so, authentic. Everyone wants that. But let me ask, as someone who is a former athlete, high school, middle school, and I'm sure you deal with a lot of people who go, "Yeah, but that's not me anymore. Triathlon, oh my gosh, I can barely walk around the block." How do you kind of reconcile the idea of what an athlete body shape should be, what an athlete training schedule should be? And have you always had a training schedule as an athlete, or are you somebody who's had, a past life where you go, "Oh no, I've worked a 9 to 5." Like, how do we get all the glory of the athlete, but also incorporate that in with body ideas of how we have to look and also time? Do I have time to move my body? How do we what do you say to kind of the average Joe who goes, "But
Yeah.
I don't have enough time?"
Yeah. Well, you've hit on a couple of things there. Let's start with the time factor because everybody has the same 24 hours, even Olympians. When, I had the opportunity to hear some Olympians speak at some of the triathlon conferences I've been to, and they have the same 24 hours a day to do their training. Granted, most of them don't work, like you mentioned, if you're fitting in a 9 to 5. But if you're training for something, if you make a decision that you want to train for something, and that could be having, just people say better health, better fitness. First of all, like, you have to define what that goal is for you.
Mhm.
And when you decide what that goal is for you, And that's something that I tend to be very good at helping people define that goal because I've set a lot of goals over my life for myself, for my children, for my athlete. I shouldn't say for myself, with my children, with my athletes. I set them for myself, but any good coach is going to work together with someone to figure out what that goal is. And then when you know what the goal is, then you decide, okay, well, how much time do I have to commit to that goal? How much time do I have until that goal is going to happen? So something simple, like a 5K. They're very popular, for fundraising and encouraging people to get moving. And they're great because you can walk a 5K. Most people can walk a 5K. Um, and it depends. Well, is the 5K next month? Is it next year? Is it, do you already walk at all? Do you run at all? My first step as a coach is to find out where that athlete is. So, in my mind, if you're deciding to set a goal, you're doing something on purpose and you're an athlete. So, like, look at where the athlete is starting. That's your starting point. And that's where you have to start. If you're here, that's where you start. You can't jump onto a training plan that starts here because you're not ready. You don't want to jump on a training plan that starts here. You'll be bored and feel like you're not doing it right because you don't are not accomplished. You need something that starts where you are. And where you are is perfect because you have no other choice. Like that's where you are. Like you can't change that. And where you are is exactly where you're supposed to be. So you start there and then you work in all the different pieces of your life, your personal life, your professional life, hobbies that you are not willing to give up, responsibilities, all that stuff, all the lists of things that we all have piling up. And then you decide, okay, well, where are the priorities? Where does this fit? And you help that person mold a plan. And, I've done training and I also have, a decade of experience now of writing training plans. So I know how the plans work and I know how to work with people to get the right information from them to put it in the plan. So in my opinion, if you're training something for something, you should have a plan. And even the people say, "Oh, I don't have a plan." There's always a plan. Because if you've decided you're training for something, you have a plan. It can be very specific. I'm a little type A. A lot of endurance athletes are type A, and they're like, "I want to know what I should do every day. When should I do this? When should I do that? When should I do the other thing? When should I rest? When should I go long? When should I go hard? When should I, you know?" And that's where having a coach really helps, because you can look and get tons of training plans online, but until you have something that's really developed for your personal situation, you won't have the best performance. And it could lead to things like, I mean, and when I say the best performance, I don't mean if you don't have a training plan that's built for you, you're not going to, get on a podium or win first place. You might get injured. Like for me, excuse me, that's one of the most important things. You want a training plan that's going to fit your abilities so that way you can keep going. If you're here and you take this training plan, the odds of getting injured are really high. And then guess what? You're done. Then you have to take a rest. So there's so many different ways to do it. There are tons of resources online. If you have the patience to research that, that's great. Definitely, my advice to people would be find something that fits where you are. Don't say, "Oh, well, I'm down here. I don't think I can start there." Then don't. Um, um, and the other question about the body type, and who belongs, that's a tough one. It really is hard because our society has an image of what an athlete is supposed to look like. And this is something that has been ingrained and has been in our faces. I'm 52 years old. As long as I can remember, the athletes look a certain way. I've never looked that way. Even when I was younger, the one athlete I did speaking of the Olympics, I did really kind of identify with was Mary Lou Retton. And so she was a gymnast in the 84 Olympics in LA. And she was a little different. She was a power gymnast. And most gymnasts were tiny. She also had short hair, which is most women have long hair. And she had this ginormously huge smile and big personality. And I remember looking at her and say, all right, she's like me. And I think that's why I loved her so much was I could see myself in her. And that's what we saw. Actually, that's one thing that we saw with the Olympics this year. There was a big movement about women empowerment of different types of athletes. Alona Meyer comes to mind. I follow her all the time on Instagram now because I love her energy. And I think she's in like the top 10 um, publicized athletes or something like that. I may have gotten the statistic wrong, but she's one of the like top known athletes right now in the world. And she is not your typical athlete look, right? She's got super broad shoulders. I mean, she is super strong. And rugby is not necessarily known as a women's sport, especially in the US. I mean, women have been playing it for years and years. It's not a very well-known sport. And she's not dainty, but yet she still considers herself feminine. And she has very broad shoulders and she talks a lot about body image and being powerful versus having these tiny little bodies. And there was just a whole movement for the Olympics where they were highlighting the weightlifters, the power gymnasts, everybody, and as well, the synchronized swimmers. I mean, Katie Ledecky, you look at her, she does not have the typical feminine body. Like, but what are we calling a typical feminine body? A supermodel? No, like, and that's what Alana Mahler is saying. She's saying every body is a women's body and a feminine body, however you want it to be. And so, yeah, there was a real great movement to come out of that. And not what I liked about it the most was it wasn't that like toxic body positive movement. It was a body acceptance, right? Like your body is built the way it is. And let's go with that. Like, what is it built for? What's it going to do?
You feel like let me just sneak this in real quick. How much of this training is emotional versus physical? Because when yes, and I'm assuming with Be Real, you're getting a lot of the quote unquote average Joes who are showing up. How much of your coaching is convincing people that they can do
Uh,
it?
yeah. Well, so convincing is an interesting word because a lot of people want to be convinced, right? And that I'm not here to convince anybody to do anything.
They came to
I'm going.
you.
Sorry.
They came to you.
That's right.
You
Right.
couldn't be convincing them at that stage.
No.
Mm,
I'm
good
here
point.
to support whatever they want. Right. And there are people who do come to me hoping I'm gonna convince them, like, oh, well, if I hire a coach, they're gonna convince me that I want to do it. It doesn't work that way, right? Even people who come to you, like and there are, I mean, I am not a mental skills professional, mental health professional. Although I have a good friend who is a mental skills coach and she has shared a lot of her strategies with me that I can use with my athletes. And sometimes I bring her in as backup. Go check out Getting Your Mind in Gear, Pat Spencer. She's outstanding. But to your point, Sarah, yeah, like I always like to explain that the word endurance has a little bit to do with physical stuff, but endurance is it's your brain. And there's a book that I read called Endure. I always forget the name of the author. And it was a whole study on do you need what's more important in an endurance situation? Is it the physical or the mental? And they did all kinds of studies, and you can't do it without the mental aspect. Because endurance can be I mean, I do some ice swimming. It's not a very long a long what's the word I'm looking for? It's not very
Like,
long. There's a word. It's not a very long activity. There we go. It's not a very long activity, but it is it uses more mind power than you could imagine. Like, it's an endurance sport, and people don't think of it. When they hear the word endurance sport, they're like, oh, it's a marathon. It's a 100-mile bike ride. It's an Ironman triathlon. It's something long because you have to like keep going and keep going. Yes, your body does physically have to keep going, but endurance is your mind getting you to do something you don't want to. So
ugh.
if that and to me, like when I swim throughout I'm in Boston and I swim throughout the winter in the ocean, and I don't wear a wetsuit. So it's my mind is enduring the stress of getting my body into the water, staying in the water, putting your face in, actually I usually do actually swim. Some people will dip. I, that's still an endurance activity. Like if you're in the cold water for an extended period of time, that is endurance. It's your mind getting your body to do something. Your mind helps you endure whatever it is you don't want to do. So absolutely, there's your mental capacity is huge,
I'm in awe. I'm the girl that wears the wetsuit in the summer.
and that's fine. And that is fine. I'm actually really glad you said that, Serena, because so many people say, "Oh well, I wear my wetsuit in the summer. Am I doing it wrong?" No. Do you like to swim in your wetsuit in the summer? Does that make you more comfortable? Then
Yes,
right.
yes,
So
I love it.
that's where you are, right?
It
And
enables
so
me to go in the sea and enjoy myself. It's great. I love it.
and that's
I
all
love
that
it.
matters,
Yeah.
right? So that's a really good example of like being where you are because that's where you are, right? So you're swimming in the sea in the summer in your wetsuit, absolutely wonderful. I'm swimming in the winter without a wetsuit, that's also wonderful, but that's where I'm at, that's where you're at, and you're not supposed to get where I'm at. Like, that's the thing people think, "Oh, well, I'm here, I have to go there." No, you're going wherever you wanna go. You wanna stay there? Awesome. You wanna try it without your wetsuit? Also awesome. Let's talk about what that might look like and what steps you might take to get there.
So I'm particularly in awe. I grew up in England. I went to an all-girls school. We had rugby. I grew up in Twickenham, so it's a big rugby town. Everyone does rugby. My brothers are biggest rugby players going. Their friends were my family are. We had rugby posts at my school. It was an all-girls school, but we loaned out our grounds to the local boys' school.
Mm,
Our sports, our sport included netball, tennis, lacrosse, and hockey. We weren't allowed to play rugby.
yeah,
Rugby was not considered a girls' sport. We
mm-mm,
weren't allowed to do certain things. It wasn't considered to be ladylike enough.
right,
So, we didn't play soccer or football, whatever you want to call it. We weren't allowed to. It just
mm,
was not on the curriculum. It was, in fact, frowned upon by the school. And at one point, we actually approached the school and said, "We have these rugby posts. We want to play rugby." And we got told, "No, you're not doing it."
yeah.
So, to hear this is really refreshing because everything's moving. The movement for women to have equality and to be able to do these things it's so refreshing for me to hear this. And
Yeah, it's progress. It's
yeah,
progress. I this was 25 years ago when I was or 30 years ago now when I was in college, and we had a club rugby team. And well, rugby at a high school level didn't even exist. Of course, we've got rugby is not a typical American sport, so that was barrier number one. So like
yeah,
the
true.
guys weren't even playing rugby, but then we added. But the interesting thing was that in America, the women played rugby a little quicker than our counterparts overseas. So I moved to France in 1997, and I said, "Oh, well, I'll go find a rugby team so that way I'll have people to hang out with and I'll meet people who I like and this is an activity I enjoy." Wonderful. And there was one rugby team in Paris. And that kind of surprised me. I was like, "But it's France, like it's rugby." So you had rugby was better known in France, but I think in America, the women's sports were sort of happening faster. And so you had this interesting combination of rugby was more popular in France, but women's sports were growing a little faster in the US. So it was really interesting. But I did find one rugby team. They were like, "Wow, we didn't know people played rugby in the US." And meanwhile, they're like, "Wow, we didn't know
Yeah,
women
we
played
all think that,
rugby."
if I'm honest.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Um, and the other side was, well, here women don't play rugby. So and now we've got an American who plays
So what
rugby
was the
and speaks
American
French.
football? So for us, I mean, we kind of mock the American football, saying it's rugby without the pad, it's rugby with padding.
Yeah.
So what was the girl movement like for American football when you
It
were growing up?
it's very tough. And it's still, there was an occasional girl well, not when I was growing up. When I was growing up, girls didn't play football. End of story. Much like your conversation, right? And these are the kinds of things that really I think drive me now to do what I do because I liked football. I played football with my brothers in the street and, because I have two older brothers, so I did all that. I would have loved to play football. I would have much rather played football than pretty much anything else, but it wasn't an option. And now you will see an occasional girl on a football team. But yeah, I mean, 30 years later, right? Change takes time. Yeah, change takes time. So, when I entered the world of triathlon, there's already a decent amount of girls. I will say it is a largely homogeneous white sport. There's not a lot of people of color. That is starting to evolve and change. For a variety, that's a whole separate discussion. But
Yep.
when I first went to triathlon and did a few triathlons, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me. I didn't look like a triathlete. And even if you look out at you watch the world championships, which is on television, right? So that's the side, that's what we're seeing, similar to the Olympics. These are the elite triathletes. Well, most of them have a certain look. They have a certain body type that they're going to carry their bodies. Oh, it's 140.6 miles, right? And most of it is cycling and running. So you might see some larger bodied swimmers. The water is a bit of an equalizer. We use our extra body fat to keep us warm in the cold. Like marathon swimmers tend to be a little more robust for those reasons, and nobody looks down their nose. No one in the marathon swimming community is going to look down their nose at a larger swim because that's not going to stop you from being a successful swimmer. But in the triathlon world, there was a guy a couple of years ago, Christian Blumenfeld. He was a larger guy. He won the race, and people were commenting online, "I bet if he lost some weight, he could have gone faster." What?
Well,
Excuse me, he won the race. He was first. He didn't have to go any faster. But we are just bombarded with the idea that and it comes from within the sport. There's books called Racing Weight, and they tell you lose weight so you can go faster, and then people stop eating enough, and then they have low energy availability, which is a big problem in the sport for women. And it's all because it's the message you're being given. Oh, if you weigh less, you can climb a hill faster. If you weigh less, there's less pounding on you when you run. Okay, I'm not denying that those are accurate statements, but it doesn't mean that if you weigh less, you're going to be a better athlete. You have to look at each person specifically.
Also, it
And
doesn't mean that all because you're a little bit heavier built that you shouldn't be doing things.
that is correct. That is correct.
And
Because
I think that's a barrier.
absolutely, absolutely. Because and some of us are there. I'm not trying to win the race, right? And I look at it. We all have choices in life, right? So do you want to choose to put all the effort in? And I actually did for a while. I mean, I'm very transparent. Team Be Real is all about being real, being authentic, and I don't have things to hide. I have things that are personal that I don't share, but I weigh over 200 pounds. I'm 5'2", so I don't know how that translates into stones and stuff like that. So typical American, I only got what I got. I'm pretty good at Fahrenheit and Celsius though, but
Oh, you're doing better than me. I'm no good at that one.
I practice it a lot because I swim. I have a big community of
Oh,
swimmers.
of
They
course. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. But I'm 5'2". I weigh a little over 200 pounds. I'm a short person, but I'm not a small person. When I did the Ironman triathlon, so an Ironman is a 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a 26.2-mile run, a full marathon. Okay, so that's what you see on TV. When people say the word triathlon, that's what they think of because that's what they see. That's not the only kind of triathlon. That's like the marathon version of a triathlon. There are much shorter, there are actually longer triathlons too. But when I did that race, I was super, super focused on everything. I had lost a bunch of weight even before I started training for other reasons, and it was intentional because that's something to think about too. People assume, oh, you're small. That's so wonderful. I know people who have lost weight because they've been ill or because they've had extreme grief. Like your body, like we just shouldn't be commenting on what people's bodies look like because you don't know where they came from. But so when I did the Ironman, I weighed about 140 pounds. So a good 60 pounds less than I am now. It took an extreme amount of mental energy, like you were saying earlier, Sarah. It took so much mental energy, probably over a 2-year period, to always be eating the right thing. Always how am I fueling my workout? How am I recovering? What am I eating the rest of the day? And I was very obsessed with the scale and what my weight was. And I was getting the input from the community that says, if you weigh less, you'll go faster and all this other stuff. Now, I was in the best shape of my life. I was by no means tiny. I was still 5'2", 140. That's a solid body. Like that is not a tiny body. And even then, I looked smaller, but I was not tiny. I still didn't look like the elite athletes who are 5'9" and 140 pounds. Right? That's a different body makeup. But it was not sustainable. And it was mentally exhausting to be at that level of commitment in all those facets. And still, I mean, I did my Ironman in over 15 hours, which is by no means a competitive time, right? Like the people who are winning it are doing it in like 8 or 9 hours or less. And so for someone like me, I put all of this time and energy into creating this body that, you know, wasn't sustainable. And now I'm back at a weight that I carried around for a long time. What's my actual best weight? Who the hell knows? I'm so confused in my head from everything that's been input into my life for so many years, from the time I was a little kid when the doctor says, well, you're very healthy, but you could lose a few pounds. Well, I actually just revived a blog post that I did that talks about if I never heard that, but you could lose a few pounds. I may not have focused on trying to lose a few pounds, which turns into disordered eating. I've never had an official eating disorder, but disordered eating, and turns into gaining weight, losing weight, and the whole yo yo factor because you think that this is not how you're supposed to be. So when I show up in my authentic self, and for anybody I coach, I want them to know that where they are right now is the perfect place to be. And you don't have to wait to gain weight, lose weight, gain muscle, lose muscle, weight, gain speed, lose wherever you're right now. You can do what you want to do. What brings you joy? What makes you excited? It's like right now, it's like I just want to swim. I don't even do a lot of triathlons anymore because it doesn't bring me the same joy that it did before. Will it again soon? Who knows? Maybe. But
I just want to point out for the people who aren't watching the podcast and listening, there are about 36 medals behind Adina. So while you're saying all this about finding joy and acceptance, that also have medals associated with that too. It's not just,
Yeah.
I have acceptance and the medal is in my head. There are physical medals behind
there are, you
done it.
absolutely one of the things I do love about triathlon and a lot of endurance sports is the finish line is celebrated, right? So most of the most of the medals that I have behind me are because I crossed the finish line. I didn't win. I didn't come in. Usually they call it on the podium. Usually like the top 3, sometimes the top 6 or even 10. The funny story, the very first time I did get on a podium, I went to a triathlon. So this was a sprint triathlon, a shorter distance. And Sarah, you asked before, people come to you like, wow, how can I even do all this? Like, how do you break it down? Well, a sprint triathlon is, it's a 1/4 mile swim. So like 500 yards, 20 laps in a pool, a 10 to 15 mile bike ride, and a 5K run. Not nearly as scary as what I described in Ironman to be, right? So and that's where I started. And I was doing these triathlons, and I was a fast swimmer compared to other people, but not a great cyclist or runner, or just average. And I went to this race. It was kind of a rainy day. I'm like, well, I don't care. I signed up, I paid for it, I'm going. And I didn't have the best race. It was decent for me, but it wasn't my best. But I met someone there who was doing their first race. And so I said, well, I'll wait for you at the end, right? Because I was like, that's exciting. Like she was by herself. She had no support. It was like, oh my gosh, like you need someone to high five you when you cross that finish line. And so I'm waiting and waiting. And all of a sudden I hear, third place, Adina O'Neill. I was like, what? I was like, wait, me? I was like, I got third place? And so I ran over and I'm like, wait, I'm here. I was like, I got my medal. And I was like, I wore that medal all day long. Like I wore it to the grocery store. I wore it all day long. And people are like, whoa, what'd you get? I was like, I got third place. And I was so like I just won the Olympics. Because that was the first time I ever earned a medal. And I was like, well, this is outstanding. Until my son at the time says, well, how many people were in your age group? Right? That's the bit. That's what happens, right? So they break them down into all these age groups. He says, well, how many people were in your age group? I was like, well, it doesn't matter. I came in third. I was like, I came in third out of the people who showed up, and I beat all the people who didn't even come. And that's
Absolutely.
yeah, and that's why I like to remind so people's like, oh well, and you know what? There were 5 people in the age group. So like I only beat 2 other people who were there, but who cares? If you don't show up, you can't win. So, there's people that all the time they just downplay everything. I just did a sprint because it's a shorter triathlon. Oh, well, that was an okay time. That was a good time for me. Or I was third, but there was only 5. No, like it was a sprint. I had a good time. I came in third place. End of story. Celebrate the shit out of that stuff. Come on. It riles me up every time.
Bottle up that energy. And like you are, I think your essence, your energy, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the end result of accomplishing something tough. And I think that when people listen to this and they go, well, okay, I do the marathon. Like, what do people get out of it? And what is there to expect? What do you find in your experience personally or with clients? Like, what comes to the surface? What feelings, what misconceptions are broken?
Yeah.
What does it feel like to like
Well,
do it?
first thing is it comes from doing something tough, but it comes from all the steps you take along the way. So my big thing is like you have to celebrate everything, right? Because if you set out to do a 5K, like day one, you put your sneakers on, you went outside, you're like, yes, I did. Like seriously, like we're always beat down about everything. And even ourselves, we beat ourselves up. That wasn't fast enough. That wasn't good enough, and we
Mhm.
do it as a means of protection, as a way even to like inspire and motivate ourselves. But dude, you gotta celebrate yourself. So like every step of the way, like I put my sneakers. Sometimes it's all you can celebrate is I put my sneakers on, right? Go for it. And you celebrate every step of the way, and all the things along the way are things that you're celebrating, you're learning, all those little milestones, you're growing and figuring things out about yourself that you didn't know. How there's really no way to identify it and really explain it until you go through it yourself. But and as I know it's such an overused term, but everybody's journey is very different. And it really is, it's like wherever you are and wherever you're going, and you don't know what you're going to find along the way. And the famous line like progress is not like this, right? It's not just a straight and beautiful curve. It's swirly and up and down and all around. And yeah, and that's why one of my the things I always say is you they keep moving forward, but forward is not necessarily a straight line, and sometimes backwards is forward. Like forward is in air quotes because you're making progress of some sort. And sometimes forward is taking 5 steps forward. Sometimes it's 2 steps to the side. Sometimes it's 3 steps back. Sometimes forward's doing nothing at all. Sitting around saying, like, I'm just done and I need a break. Like, that's all a part of moving forward. And whatever pace you're moving forward at, that's the book. Forward is a pace. Whatever pace you're moving forward at is the pace for you. You don't have to compare it to somebody else. And these are all the things that you learn along the way. You learn your pace. You learn what going forward means. You learn what excites you and what doesn't. And you try different things. You say, well, maybe I want to do a 5K. Try it. Oh, I don't like this at all. Let me try something else. Maybe I want to go rock climbing. Try it. Yeah, that's great. Rock climbing. I love it. 2 years later, maybe you don't love rock climbing anymore and you want to try something else. Yeah, wherever and for all the like Sarah, you said you were an athlete in middle school. For all the people who were athletes and now they're like, oh, well, I can't do that now. I'm too old. I have a job. I have kids. Or it's huge discussion in the menopause space because our bodies are changing and nobody really told us that as awful as puberty was to go through, like menopause is just the undoing. It's like the same thing on the other side of life. And is the and we should stop saying it's awful. It's a challenging time. It is a challenging time, but we made it through puberty and then we're at the other side and we're undoing all the hormones. It's a challenging time, but we make it through. And you just have to reframe to figure out what it is you're going to do with your life. And maybe the things you did when you were 20 or 30 or 40 are not the things you're doing now. And you find new things. And I tell you, Serena, I was like you. At one point, I said, there's no way I'm jumping in the ice water. See people doing those polar plunges. It's a little crazy, and now I'm leading the pack. It's it's a different I'm in a different space. There and those 2 to 3 minutes, 5, 10, whatever we stay in the cold water, it's such an introspection and connection with your own self. That is it's Did I answer the question? I feel like I went off on a tangent. I get
No,
off.
you
I'm just loving your passion for all of
you did.
this.
You answered the question. I think I also want to make sure that you did write a book, Forward is a Pace. And I want to call that out because that is, it's available on Amazon. It's highly rated, but I think it's refreshing and is showing it right now. And refreshing because here's a woman who's done 100, 100+ endurance events. And yet it's so refreshing to hear you say forward is sometimes taking 2 steps back
Mhm.
to the side because that messaging of you hear endurance events, 100 endurance events, you hear polar plunge, you hear and you go, "Oh, she never has a bad day." And you do. Because forward is a
It's not even just the sports, it's life itself. We can
yeah.
all resonate with that message that in that it can fit in so many aspects of our lives.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to have some wonderful friends who bought the book just for support, because it is geared towards triathletes and endurance athletes. But some of my friends said, "Oh, well, I'll buy your book. Like that's cool. I have a friend who wrote a book. Like, people are nice like that. Like it's good." And it's fun to hear them come back to me and say, "Oh, I was having a bad day at work the other day, and I was just going, all right, forward is a pace, forward is a pace. I can get through this." And it just becomes this little mantra that, like you said, Serena, really applies to anything. And you mentioned business. We're all entrepreneurs here chatting, and there is nothing more that you need than that mantra to I mean, for me personally, there are times where I just crash and it's just so overwhelming the number of things that you have to do, that you want to do. And you know I literally just said to my brother on the phone a couple of days ago, I said, "Dude, September and October were just so slow." And I was in this space that I couldn't pull myself together and couldn't figure out what I needed to do now. I've got a to-do list a mile long and ideas coming out from everywhere, but I could not pull myself together. I said, September was like a standstill and October was just like so slow. And he goes, "Hey," he goes, "A D," 'cause my brother calls me a D. He goes, "I heard this lady, she said forward is a pace." I was like, "Yes."
I
Like, "Oh, he's
gotcha.
throwing my old stuff back at me." I was like, "All right, he's listening. At least he's listening. I'll take it." But it,
Yeah.
it is so true. It's so important because and you can look at entrepreneurship, much like an endurance sport, right? Because we've got this hustle culture, right? Oh, I work 25 hours a day and I have 12 businesses. And when you start out, I arrived at this space going, oh my gosh, like my jaw's on the floors. Like, how am I going to do any of that? I don't know how to do any of that. I don't have the time, the energy, all those same questions you asked me in the beginning, Sarah, about starting
Yeah.
to train for something. I was like, that is ridiculous. And even now, 5 years in, there are times I look at people as like, how do they move that quickly? And I'm like, oh no, I'm going at my pace. Like I'm doing what I need to do. I missed a deadline. Yeah, there's a consequence, right? You miss a deadline, there's a consequence, but it's my pace. No one is telling there's no wrong way to do it. So it's yeah.
It's there's and I know let me make this very I know you're not a life coach. I know that's not your gig, but I hear so much of life reflections and journeys through through the vehicle of, athletic training. And I think what really separates you from a lot of the athletic coaches I've been exposed to primarily on the internet is it's a lot of, aspirational. This is who I want to be, a certain body type. The hair is always perfect during the workout. The nutrition's always on point. But to your point, the more we buy into that, the more we feel like shit because that is simply not sustainable for anybody unless perhaps You're the Olympic athlete who has the 5 coaches who you're breathing, eating, sleeping this. So I appreciate the honesty, the authenticity, and the realness while also getting the results because the
Yeah,
results
you can. Yeah,
are always what you make them.
that's right.
Love
That's
it.
right.
The
And
other thing I'm taking from it, and I'm gonna flip it back to the business side here, is you were talking about, the aspirational kind of business owner work 25 hours and all the rest of it. You also have this whole Instagram world that like, oh yeah, I get up, I take a few snaps and I'm done for the day and I'm earning $40,000 an hour. Check out my feed and I'll show you how. I mean, we're bombarded.
yeah.
No, sorry.
So let's all just call bullshit on that right now. Like, that's a
Yeah,
big
we
old
all know
no.
it's endurance sport.
Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur is endurance.
It is an endurance sport.
It's
I
about
actually one of
showing up. It's about being 1 5 who and coming third. It's about showing up. It's about being there and I mean, putting it into my world, it is an endurance sport. You do go backwards, you do get it wrong, you know.
and that's really where, my experience as an endurance athlete totally helps me with my experience as an entrepreneur because we are doing all of those things to figure ourselves out, and it is an endurance sport. It is a mental game. It's at your own pace. It's in your own way. You have to be
Out of your
authentic.
comfort zone.
Oh, yeah. But and I've tried it the other way. Like, I'll be honest. I mean, I know when we had our like kind of introductory discussion, I talked about I started out working with an MLM, a direct sales company, and I try to be that person, right? There's like, oh well, all you have to do is post this and reach out to people and make friends and show this and it didn't work for me because that wasn't me. And like that I learned a lot. Now, I do have to say that people give MLMs a bad name and I highly disagree. The concept, it is not a pyramid scheme. I always have to get on my soapbox and say this because it is not a pyramid scheme if I'm selling you a product and you're getting a product or a service, that's not a pyramid scheme. Okay. And it was their business structure. And I was fortunate enough to learn from some mentors in that space who taught me so many wonderful things that I still use today. But just that the company I was working with and the product and their vision was not totally aligned with mine. There were a lot of pieces, but they were very big on the aesthetics, and how you look and how all that was important. That's not important to me. I've had the same haircut for like 40 years. It does not matter to me. Like, and literally, I was like, "Oh, is my hair okay?" And I was like, "I don't care." Like, you look on my Instagram, hair's all over. I never wear makeup. I always in a t-shirt. Like, and those things in the greater scheme of things don't sell, right? Because we have been brainwashed to think that what sells is the perfect haircut with the perfect face, the perfect makeup, and the perfect. Then nobody's perfect. We're just all real. So I actually didn't tell you. Real is so be real actually stands for something. It is real, but it's a realistic, empowered, attainable lifestyle. And the B is for belonging because everybody needs to belong. I grew up a long time feeling like I didn't fit in when I was I grew up in a predominantly white Christian town. I mean, yes, I am white, so I did fit that role, but I was a short, fat, smart Jewish kid in the band. Like nobody that was not a recipe for fitting in. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. They're all part of it, and they're all things that I'm proud of now, but they were all things that I fought against. And even like being a girl versus a boy, they were all things that I fought against and felt like I didn't fit in. And I that sucks. Like that it did, and that's kind of where all my passion comes from because I don't want anybody to feel like that. Like it was awful to feel like that. And I am lucky to have grown up in an environment where my parents supported everything that I wanted to do. I recognize that that is a privilege that not everybody has. And we didn't have a ton of money, so there were choices to make of what things I could and couldn't do. I mean, I wanted to be an I wanted to be Mary Lou Retton. We didn't have the money or resources to send me to a gymnastics, so I swam like my brothers. Even though I started it, but got tired of it. We all swam. That's what we did. That's how it worked. But I wasn't held back. And then it allows me to somehow, like this is natural. I've always been loud. I've never had a problem talking in groups, in front of people. I don't care if I make a mistake because mistakes happen. I'm sure that happened. My parents let us make mistakes. And now I see people around me who don't have one or some of those characteristics. And if I can be a voice to help them get to a place where they show up so they can get third out of five people in their age group, so they can be fifth out of five people in their age group, so they can be dead last. People never want to be last. You still beat everyone who didn't show up. So they cannot finish, so they can just try. Like that, those are the people, like, I just wanna give them all a big freaking hug and say, like, "You deserve it."
You need a
Pre
t-shirt with that on.
I'm sorry?
You need a t-shirt with that on.
Mm,
You still beat everyone that didn't show up.
yeah.
That's a slogan there.
Yeah.
Love that.
I might have to add that one to my shop. I don't
It's
You
great bumper
should.
sticker. I feel like that's one of those, it's great, like, to put on the water bottle, like, because it's catchy, it's little let me ask you, if you could look back at that young girl that you just described, that girl who was in the band, who, you felt like you didn't fit in, and you had the opportunity to give her one statement, one sentence, from knowing what you know now, what are you saying to 10-year-old Adina?
as it all those things are you, and whatever makes you you is what is important. And I think that's the message I got from my parents, which is how I get to be the Adina that I am now. I mean, one of the biggest questions I've heard on a million, I've been a guest on a few other podcasts, and people say, "Well, what would you change?" I wouldn't change any of it. Like you need all those experiences to learn and grow. Um, I wouldn't be who I am now if I got to go to gymnastics instead of swimming. I would have had a different trajectory. If I didn't play in the band because it wasn't cool, I wouldn't be able to empathize with people who feel like they're not cool. If I didn't grow up in a town where my religious upbringing was very different from others people, I wouldn't have an open mind to that. So all of those things are, they're it downright sucks sometimes. Like, and even now, like you go as a 52-year-old woman, I go through things that are hard every day. And sometimes they really suck. And you do have to remind yourself that, it's like Pink says, the Pink song Turbulence, right? It's just turbulence. By the way. Say it.
I love Pink. She's
Oh
got so
yeah.
much energy and she's so feisty and
Oh yeah.
she
And
do
very
everything.
authentic.
I think she's incredible.
She is at the front of the women empowerment movement. Like she definitely is someone who I admire on so many levels. But that song, it's turbulence. Like it's just going to it's you're in a plane, like it's bumpy, but it's gonna stop, right? And all those bumps, like they're hard to work through, and sometimes they last longer than others, but you've made it through all the hard days. Like, how does that saying go? So they're like, all those really hard days you've had, you've made it through every one of them. So like, pat yourself on the back because
Like you've made it through 100% of your worst days.
exactly. There you go. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So
Thank you.
far.
Yes.
The optimism
have
in
all-
me so
I
far.
don't have all the words. Yeah, but it is. It's yeah. It's really so it is, and it is hard to look back. I mean, it's all the things that I try to share with my daughter, who 30 years later is like a little mini me, and she's on a different trajectory. But like, I'm on my third career, and she's all nervous about what she's doing in college. I was like, dude, just do what you're doing now. Like, stay in the moment, do what you're doing now. And who knows? It's like, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. You don't have to decide now.
One of the things we do at the end of the podcast is we ask you to ask the next person a question. So your question was, what would you ask? What would you tell 10-year-old you? So we'd like to know now what you would like to ask the next fearless woman that we have on our podcast.
All right. So I'm going to say my question would be, what is one thing that you can shout yourself out for that you're really proud about? Because I do think that's there's a problem that we think when women are proud of themselves that we're bragging. And I disagree. I respectfully, strongly, vehemently disagree. Being proud is not bragging. And one thing that I encourage everybody who I come in contact with is to own it and be proud of yourself. So I guess my question would be, what is one thing that you can just say like, hey, I did this, I'm good at this, that you're proud of. So I do think that that's something that every woman, child, men have that issue too. Um, People think that if you're proud of you shout yourself out, you're bragging. No, being proud is not bragging. And even bragging is not being arrogant, right? So brag a little. Don't be a
Yeah.
jerk. Don't put other people down.
I
This-
love
this-
how your question was so the essence too of your energy, right? Like we've asked this to a lot of guests, and sometimes it's like, oh, like what would you say to your younger self, or like I don't know, gin or vodka, But like, I find it very interesting that your question focuses on, and I don't know if this is subconsciously or consciously, it focuses on uplifting the other person because when people talk about what they're proud of, you can't help but recognize your own worth. So I think that's very interesting that that's your question, which is a bit of your spirit in a nutshell.
It's something I'm very proud of. I have an ability, one of my superpowers is to help people feel good about what they're doing. To give them that permission. And it's and also, to be honest, I didn't realize. I was like, oh, I'm having this whole discussion about my business and my mission and all this other stuff. I was like, I need a deep question. I didn't realize I could have asked them what their favorite cereal was.
Gin or vodka? That was one of our questions.
I love cereal, like, right? Yeah, I'm an overachiever. I was like, oh my gosh, this has to be a good one.
Oh no,
Sometimes
we're
I'm too-
real.
Yeah, sometimes I'm too serious for my own good. Like, I promise I know how to have fun. But no, but I'm very like, when I take things seriously, I take it seriously. And I have fun in my own way, but I was like, well, this is a serious thing. I'm gonna ask a serious question.
I think it's a great question, and
Thank you.
I
Yeah.
really have enjoyed your energy throughout this whole thing, and your passion. And I mean, we could have really gone down like a tunnel of how women impose their looks and how they worry about things, and we didn't. And I'm rather proud of us for that. And I think that's all to you, Adina, and less to me.
That's always been, let me just say, that's always been Adina's energy. I've known Adina for many years. Let me also just say that we lived in the same
She's
town.
built up women without at all
Yes.
making anybody else feel as though they should be guilty for it. I love that.
And she's always been that way. I mean, this is the honest to God's truth. From the time I met her when I used to work at a spa, even during maybe, I don't know, it was like our 10-minute session together, I was like, "Who the hell is this woman?" And I started following you on Facebook and your wetsuits and your triathlons, and
Not
that's
wetsuits.
yeah, we're not
I
wet.
used to wear wetsuits.
You used to wear yes.
I used to wear wetsuit.
Yes. Yeah, but it's so it's so beautiful that, we always tell women or we try to preach this because this is the truth. Follow your passion and the money will always come and the fame or whatever else you want, all those other tangible things will come, but you have to be passionate about what you're doing. You have to truly believe it. If you want people to quote unquote buy in you to what you're selling, you have to be likable, you have to be knowledgeable, and you have to be
Show up.
you have to show up and be authentic. So you showed up to our podcast. You are authentic as hell. No, let's go by the Adina rules. You showed up authentic as hell. You were likable as hell. You wrote a book. For it is a page. Again, what a beautiful message. So thank you, Adina. We'll have all your information on our website. But for those listening, teambereal.com. It's TEAMBREAL.com. You will see Adina's beautiful smiling face front page on the website, which is another thing. You show up, and a lot of sites, the hero shot or the top photo is usually some verbiage and maybe some pretty background color. It's you in the pool with a big old smile, which I just is like, that is, if you're looking for a coach to help with the athletic training, great. But I always, I have to say, I feel like anyone who just comes in contact with you leaves a little bit brighter, more chipper. So that's kind of that superpower within your Team Be Real. So thank you, Adina. I feel like I want to go out and start running.
I feel like an athlete already. I walked around the block earlier.
Yes. Come on over, Serena. Get on a plane. We're doing a triathlon, baby.
Yeah.
Hey, I
I'll do the
rem-
micro one. What was it? The
Micro-
sprint.
The sprint.
sprint.
That's right. You start with a
The
sprint.
sprint.
I
I'll
do
start with the sprint.
I do remote coaching. I was like, I work with people. I've got a lady in Australia who follows me and checks in with me. She's like, I need some help. It's like technology is great. You can
Absolutely.
yeah. So I got you covered, Serena. I got beginner
Awesome.
stuff. We'll get you covered. We'll get you hooked up.
Listen,
But-
if that energy comes through the camera, imagine what it would be like in person. The fact that this energy comes through the camera, so that woman in Australia is so damn
Yeah.
lucky
Yeah.
because that girl in Boston.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the chance to chat with you guys. It's been great.
Yes.
I always love an opportunity to share and help and encourage anybody who I can. It is hard. I think the hardest thing about being an entrepreneur is we think it's all about the money. And obviously we need money to live. Like, let's be real. I didn't mean that, but
We'll take it.
the biggest lesson that I've learned is that the impact that I have been able to make on the lives of the people who I've come into contact with has far outweighed any monetary value that I could put on anything. And it goes both ways. It's the impact when I hear people say, wow, you really helped me feel more confident, or I never thought I could do that, or wow, I'm so glad I finally found a place that I could belong, that someone understands me. But it's also the impact it makes on me of how I feel about myself and what I'm contributing to society. I don't make a ton of money doing what I'm doing, but the value of the impact it's immeasurable.
Well, thank you, Adina. Thank you for gracing us with all things positive, and we look forward to seeing where the journey takes you.
Well, thanks. I always like to say at the end, have fun, be real, and keep moving forward.